So the last part of the zoning laws that you need to be familiar with is the spot zoning. And spot zoning is really it's what it sounds like, where you've got like a little cluster of one type of land use surrounded by something completely different. It's very common. You could actually, a lot of times when you drive through town, you might see, depending on the town you're in, I guess, but a lot of times you'll notice you'll have like a little small cluster of residential homes surrounded by all the commercial buildup. Well, it's like a little spot zone. Or it could be the other way around. You could have a little small cluster or area of commercial surrounded by all residential. Again, another example of a spot zone. That's really all they're talking about there. And then there's the buffer zone. A buffer zone is required to separate two different land uses. For example, if you've got a property that's zoned commercial over here, and then you've got property that's used for residential purposes here that are adjacent to one another, there has to be something to separate these two different zone types. And that's what we refer to as a buffer zone. Now, whatever is between the two, it could be almost anything. It could be a wall, could be a fence. It could be just a strip of vacant land that you can't use. It's just being used as a buffer. But a very common use of a buffer zone, in fact, I know they like to ask this as a question on the exam, quite frankly, is, in fact, the question will go something like, if you got large commercial buildings adjacent to adjacent to residential properties, and right between the two is a small park, what might you refer to that park as being? Well, obviously a buffer zone. In fact, anything that sits between, divides two different zone types, again, that's considered a buffer zone. So now we move on to some other examples of this police power. The next one would be building codes. If you decided to build a house, obviously you can't just start nailing boards together, right? There are requirements. And one of the first requirements is you have to submit an application for a permit. You got to get a permit to do any type of construction, because it has to be constructed to code. You ought to make sure it's safe. There are no issues there that could get somebody hurt or even killed. We also got to make sure that whatever you're doing complies with zoning laws, right? So, here's what really we need to understand here as real estate agents. And I will tell you, a lot of real estate agents are not doing a very good job at this. In fact, I think they would prefer to plead ignorance and see where that gets them. But anyway, first of all, what kind of construction requires a permit? Well, I will tell you, you need to find out from your municipality, wherever you live, and ask that question. I wouldn't just start doing work on the house or something, or on the property for that matter, without first knowing, am I required to have a permit for this or not? Y'all just contact the building department for whatever municipality you live in, because obviously that's where you got to submit your applications for a permit, and just ask them. You might say, look, I'm looking at putting a deck on the back of my house, or I am rebuilding a deck. I'm replacing the deck. I am updating or remodeling my bathroom. I'm remodeling my kitchen. Whatever it is you're doing, I would, until you know what's required to have a permit and what's not, I would always want to call the building department and just ask them. First of all, tell them what are you planning to do, and then they will tell you if you need a permit for that or not. I can tell you, in the municipality I live in, just about anything you can think of requires a permit. Putting a deck on the backyard, on the back of the house rather. But you got to have a permit. So let's talk about why. What's the purpose of the permit? And this really matters. This is important. Not only test purposes, but when you're practicing. When you submit an application for a permit because you want to do some type of construction, remodel, whatever it is you're doing, first of all, the first thing the municipality will determine is, are you allowed to do or have what you're proposing to do? Y'all say, for example, you want to build a shed or a shop or something in the backyard. That requires a permit. And the first thing the municipality will determine is, are you allowed to have that shed or that shop? In other words, are there any zoning issues that would prevent you from having it? You could have an HOA that would prevent you from doing certain things as well. But the point is, as long as there's no law or regulation that says you can't have it, then the municipality will allow you to do it. It's your property. You can do whatever you want to, again, as long as it's compliant with laws and regulations. So the other thing that the municipality wants to make sure of is, once you get the permit, typically the way they're going to do this, they're going to say, all right, you go ahead and start work, but once you get to this point, you need to stop. Do not do anything beyond a certain point. Then they'll send their building inspector out to inspect what you've done up to that point, make sure it meets code, make sure everything is right. And then usually when the building inspector's leaving, they'll say, all right, now you can go ahead and begin, do some more work. But they usually say, but then when you get to this point, you need to stop again so we can come back out and inspect and whatnot. So again, now why does all that matter? For real estate agents anyway. Well, because if I'm a real estate agent and I know you got a permit to put that shop in the backyard or put a deck on the back of the house, there's two things that are critical that I need to know as your real estate agent. Number one, again, because you got a permit, I know you're allowed to have whatever you've done here. That's number one. Number two, I know it's safe. It meets code because it's been inspected by a building inspector. And that's critical when you're selling real estate. That is absolutely critical. Now the issue you see a lot or run into a lot is, most people never get a permit for things that they are required to have a permit for. They'll just go ahead and put a deck on the back of the house. Maybe nobody will ever know. Maybe they just built the shop. Maybe well, let me ask you this. Do you have to have a permit to renovate or remodel a kitchen or a bathroom, whatever? And again, I suspect it will vary from one municipality to the next. So that's why you got to ask. But I'll tell you, where I live, for the most part, if you're doing anything that requires you to even touch plumbing or electrical, you better have a permit. You better have a permit to do that. Again, that's not every municipality, but it's a lot of them. So, if you go in there and you just want to totally renovate your bathroom, you're going to tear everything out, put all new. You're dealing with a lot of plumbing there, and quite frankly, good chance you're dealing with some electrical there. But at least plumbing, and I can about tell you that requires a permit. So, when you're looking at a property and the the seller a lot of times say, "Oh, well, look, we just replaced this deck. This is a brand new deck on the back of the house. We just renovated the bathrooms, kitchens, whatever it is they did." Well, now, y'all, based on what we just talked about, what do you now know about what they did? They should have gotten a permit, right? More than likely, they should have gotten a permit. So, as the agent, I'm going to ask, y'all, even if they don't volunteer the information, y'all, you need to ask the question. Well, seller, this looks awesome. I love this deck out here. This is just awesome. Seller, did you get a permit before you built this deck? Y'all, and assuming they did, which would be really good, then I would like to have a copy of that permit just to put it in my file. And if the seller doesn't have a copy of it, and they may not, especially depending on how long it's been, y'all, you can certainly get a copy of the permit from the building department. Y'all, I just like to have it for my sake. Y'all, is it possible the seller could tell you they did get a permit, when in fact they did not? And now you're out there telling the public that this is permitted work, and it's not. Y'all, you're going to be liable for that, or potentially could be liable for that. So y'all, I always verify, and the only way I can verify that is get a copy of the permit, and I will get a copy of it. But what if they didn't get a permit? Now what? Well, you can still sell the house or put the property up for sale, but and you need to let the seller know this. We're going to have to disclose to the buyer that there was no permit for that deck or that shop or that bathroom, whatever it is you did, there was no permit. So at least it's disclosed. Buyer, there was no permit, and at least the buyer now, basically they're accepting the potential liability and or responsibility if it wasn't built correctly or if it wasn't allowed to be there to begin with. Buyer, you knew it going in that there was no permit, and apparently you didn't care because you bought it anyway. But at least you disclosed it, and that's all you can do as the agent. But if you don't disclose it, you're going to have a problem. It could be a problem. So anyway, that's just one more example of police power. Subdivision regulations, HOAs, the homeowners association. A lot of people don't like HOAs. I hear it all the time. I hate my HOA. And I got to pay money to them for them to make me do or not do something I don't want to do or whatever. I will tell you, I'm not the biggest fan of HOAs either, quite frankly, but if I'm going to live in a neighborhood with other people, then, I will tell you, HOAs are necessary. Because, if you don't think your neighbor or neighbors can destroy your property value, then you haven't lived in a neighborhood very long, if ever. The reason HOA has these covenants and restrictions on what you can and can't do, the purpose is to protect everybody's property value. So, you might not want your neighbor putting a chicken wire fence around the front yard or something like that. Maybe your neighbor's not taking care of their property. They're not cutting the grass. They're not maintaining the property, whatever the case may be. But I will tell you, that will affect your property values. If your neighbor's property value is going down because of neglect, poor maintenance, then your property value is going to go down. So, that's why you have the HOAs to force people to maintain their property. And, if they're going to paint the house, a lot of times they'll even have a lot to do with what colors you're allowed to paint it. Some neighborhoods might not want you to paint your house orange or purple, or something like that. Y'all, look, if that's your color that you want for your house, hey, I'm all for it. But, y'all, that's just not very typical, very common, y'all, in most neighborhoods. So they may not allow you to do stuff like that, right? But that's why they do it. Y'all, that's what these subdivision regulations are for. But why does this matter? What's the big deal? Y'all, first of all, y'all, even though my covenants and restrictions say I must cut my grass every other day, I'm being facetious, but y'all, a lot of times they will lay out how often you must cut your grass. Well, if you don't cut your grass, then you're in violation of the covenants and restrictions. What can the HOA do about it? Or can they? Well, there's a lot they can do about it. Y'all, hopefully they might put a little sticky note or something on your door and say, hey, you need to cut your grass, and then you better get it cut. But if you don't, then they might say, all right, well, if we got to tell you again, we're going to fine you. Y'all, and they have the right to do that. But y'all, if it gets bad enough and you just refuse to comply with the HOA guidelines, y'all, could they eventually even take the house from you, kick you out? Yes, they can. Well, what authority do they have that would allow them to do such a thing? Police power. Y'all, HOAs are granted police power. Remember, that's authority granted by the state to enforce certain rules, laws, regulations, as in this case, restrictions, y'all, you name it. But y'all, that's just another example of police power. Now, the next example of police power is health and sanitation laws. I think this is sort of a no-brainer. I think we understand what this is. Y'all got to be clean, right? Y'all, for health and safety reasons. But y'all, if you're going to a restaurant to eat out one night, y'all, wouldn't you like to think that whoever it is handling and preparing the food you're getting ready to eat, wouldn't you like to think they washed their hands when they came out of the bathroom? Yeah, we'd like to think that. But y'all, whether they did or they didn't, y'all, there are guidelines, y'all, there are regulations on safety, on health, cleanliness, and stuff like that. Okay. Y'all, just some terms you might want to be familiar with when you're dealing with, or even for test purposes, answering questions about sanitation laws. Y'all, health and sanitation. Y'all, first of all, hazard. What is that? It's a generic term for any situation or state of events which poses a threat to the surrounding environment. Y'all, kind of makes sense. That's a hazard. Anything that poses a threat to the environment is a hazard. What is contamination? It's the existence of a hazardous substance in the environment. A superfund. Y'all, it's used to clean up hazardous waste sites. Y'all, where do these funds come from? Y'all, some of it comes from the government. But y'all, some of it comes from those that have created these hazards. Y'all maybe have created issues to the environment, so they get fined. Well, then maybe some or all of that money will go into this super fund, which is used again to clean up waste sites, y'all, hazardous waste sites and so forth. And then, y'all, the term abatement, you could certainly see a question asking, what is abatement? And it says that's the act of eliminating any issues, environmental issues. That's all they're talking about there. If DHEC, for example, cites you because you're the owner of the property and they've determined there's a hazardous environmental issue on the property, they could require you to abate the problem, to eliminate whatever that issue is. Okay? And then we get into some actual environmental protection laws. And I'm sure you know And the environment's a big deal, especially to the government today. You better not do anything that would have a negative impact on the environment. That could get you in trouble. We got to protect the air quality, the water quality, the soil quality. We can't do anything that's going to have a negative impact there. But what I want you to really pay attention to is this environmental impact report. I'm telling you, they like to ask about that, or what's the purpose of the environmental impact report. Say you have a developer buy a tract of land with the intentions of developing this tract of land, and a lot of times it would require the developer to either cut down a lot of trees. You got to move a lot of soil. Might have to haul a lot of soil away. May have to haul a lot of soil in. Whatever the case may be, for them to do whatever they've intended to do with this property. Well, before you're allowed to do any of that, then you have to have an environmental impact report. They're going to have to do a study. That's DHEC. They'll do a study to determine, if you're going to do this, 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 and this, would that have a negative impact on the environment? And if so, how are you going to control it? How are you going to eliminate it? Whatever the case may be. But I will just tell you, typically speaking, if at the end of the day that report indicates that it's going to have whatever you're proposing, if it would have a negative impact on the environment, they're not going to allow you to do whatever it was you're proposing to do. So typically when you're dealing with transactions like this that would involve this type of work, if you will, this could take a while. You could have you could have 6 months, in some cases up to a year, that we refer to as a due diligence period. Because if I'm that developer, I don't want to spend all this money buying this property and then find out that because of the environmental impact report, I'm not going to be able to do what I wanted to do with it. So a lot of times they'll go ahead and get the property under contract, and then they may have several months to do all this due diligence to make sure they can do whatever it is they were hoping to do. But that's the impact report. And then, there's a term there, mitigation, and a process to make issues less severe through avoiding, rectifying, or through compensation. What they're talking about there is, if you just go out and start doing clearing land or whatever, and you never got an impact report, and come to find out that we've determined that what you've done has now upset the environment. You've done a wrong to the environment. Then we're going to have to mitigate. They'll figure out somehow that the government's got their formulas and whatnot. Based on the amount of damage you've done to the environment, here's what it's going to cost you. And somehow that's going to remedy the problem, I guess. But that's what the mitigation is about. Just making things right. That's it. Okay. Now, we've talked about several different types of police power here, right? Several different types. Zoning laws, building codes, health and sanitation, environmental, quite a few of them. All the ones we've talked about up to this point are considered public controls. What we're getting ready to look at now, there's two types of police power that involve private controls. You will have to keep this separate. You must be able to identify which types of police power is considered a public control versus which type is considered a private control. And what they're talking about, if it's public, they're talking about the government. These are controls that were put on us by the government. Those are public controls. What we're getting ready to look at now, y'all, two examples of private controls, which also deal or have police power. But y'all, because it's a private control, y'all, these are requirements we put on ourselves. The government didn't put these on us. We did it ourselves. Y'all, the first one we look at would be deed restrictions. Y'all, we've talked about this a little bit. We've alluded to it anyway in an earlier chapter. But y'all, if you recall, I said, y'all, before you ever put a property on the market, or if you're working with a buyer before you make an offer, y'all, there's at least one of two documents I think you should have in your possession. Y'all, one is a copy of the deed. Remember, so now y'all, in the deed, it clearly lays out who the legal owner or owners are. Y'all, the legal description. Y'all, there's a lot of good information you need to know about that property before you try to sell it that comes from the deed. Well, another thing you want to be careful of or look at in the deed, are there any restrictions, right? Are there any deed restrictions? Did the seller or whoever you obtained this property from put restrictions on what you could or could not do with the property? And if they did, then it will be in the deed, right? Now, if there are deed restrictions, y'all, if you recall from the previous chapter, y'all, just as a matter of review, y'all, what type of estate would that be? So if you own an estate that has deed restrictions, what kind of estate do you own? Y'all, that's the defeasible fee. Remember, I told you a couple of times. Y'all, anytime you hear the word defeasible, the first thing you should think about are restrictions. And if you violate the restriction, you no longer own the property. It now conveys to somebody else, y'all, depending on which type defeasible fee they decide to put in place. But again, y'all, the government didn't decide this restriction should be here. Y'all, this is something that another homeowner did. Y'all, we did it ourselves. This is a restriction we did or we put on ourselves. Y'all, that's a private restriction. So that's the first of the private controls, deed restrictions. Y'all, the other one is the CC&Rs. Y'all, your covenants and restrictions. Y'all, if you have an HOA and you have covenants and restrictions, y'all, that's what we're talking about here. Y'all, different HOAs have different conditions and restrictions. But guess what? The government didn't decide what the restrictions are going to be for that neighborhood. Y'all, who determines what the covenants and restrictions are going to be? The homeowners. So again, y'all, this is another form of police power. But y'all, these are things we did or put on ourselves. Had nothing to do with the government. So there's only two types of private controls: deed restrictions and covenant and restrictions. All the other forms of police power we talked about earlier are all considered public controls. You know, I'm telling you, they'll probably ask you a question: which of the following forms of police power is considered a public control or a private control? You got to know the difference. All righty. All right. So now let's talk about some potential environmental hazards. Y'all, first of all, the first type is what we, if I can get it out, y'all, it's called asbestos. Y'all, most of these, if not all of these we're going to talk about, I'm pretty sure you've heard of them. You probably at least know a little bit about each one, but they're all important. Now, first of all, why do we even need to know about them? Y'all, is it possible that the law would require, if any of these environmental hazards exist in or on the property you're selling, do you think that would have to be disclosed to the buyer? Absolutely. Absolutely. So the first one we look at is asbestos. Y'all, we have learned that asbestos can cause some pretty serious, pretty significant health problems to a lot of people, primarily creating lung issues, diseases, and so forth. So what's the issue, or other than it creating a health problem? How does it do that? And if it does do that, then why do we use this material in a lot of our building products? Well, first of all, the reason we started using asbestos really is for two primary reasons, and y'all, you need to know this for test purposes. Y'all, asbestos is an excellent insulator. Y'all, it's about the best insulation you could get. It's an excellent insulator. And number two, it's fire retardant. Y'all, it doesn't burn. Y'all, doesn't that sound like a pretty good type of construction material to use in a home? Excellent insulation, and it does not burn. It's fire retardant. Y'all, that's why it was used a lot in older homes anyway. Y'all, say older homes because we've now learned that, y'all, as good as it might be as a building material, y'all, if this material becomes friable, y'all, if you break it, y'all, and particles are released into the air and you breathe it in, y'all, that's where you have problems. If it ever becomes friable, meaning it's been broken, and y'all, and that's the particles within it is being released into the air, y'all, as you breathe it, that's what causes the lung issues, diseases, and stuff like that. So for that reason, y'all, a lot of people don't like asbestos, and quite frankly, we don't see asbestos used in as construction material nearly as much as it used to. I'm guessing, y'all, I'm not suggesting you need to know this date necessarily for test purposes, but I will just tell you, if you've got a house that's, say, built in the 1970s or before, y'all, good chance everything about that house, according to the experts, will kill you. But apparently in the 70s is when we got smart and realized, number one, asbestos is bad for you. Y'all, and it can be. I don't mean to make too light of it, but y'all, if you've got a house and there's asbestos in that property, you have to disclose that to the potential buyer. But y'all, they use asbestos in a lot of flooring. In fact, y'all, I'm gonna tell you, if this is a house built in the 70s or before, and it still has the original flooring in the kitchen, for example, y'all, it looks kind of like a linoleum that we use a lot today. It's not linoleum, but it looks like it, and even in some cases feels like it. But y'all, that flooring typically was made with asbestos. And I see people, especially buying older houses to fix them up and to flip, y'all, they just go in there with a little shovel and they're just digging it up, peeling it up off the floor. And I'm guessing they don't know what they're peeling up, but y'all, when you start tearing that floor all to pieces, y'all, it's becoming friable, and now you breathe that stuff in, y'all, this is where you can have some health issues. Y'all, they used asbestos a lot in wood stoves, the insulation part of a wood stove. Y'all, you see a lot of houses that have asbestos siding, y'all, the exterior siding. Now, so again, does that mean if it has asbestos siding that's hazardous? Y'all, not as long as it stays intact. But y'all, if you break it, or again it becomes friable, y'all, that's when you've got a potential problem here. But y'all, at the end of the day, y'all, if there's asbestos siding, you have to disclose it. There's asbestos siding on this property or on this house. All right, we beat that up enough. Underground storage tanks, or USTs. Y'all, these were, again, used in houses back in the day. I'd say right around the 70s or before. But y'all, a lot of people, and even still today, heat with fuel oil. That's how they heat their home, fuel oil. And that we just decided one day, you know what, these tanks, and typically we had them just kind of sitting maybe on the side of the house or maybe behind the house, but just had a tank that would hold all the fuel oil in it. We decided to start burying those tanks, so it didn't look so bad. You couldn't see it. Well, when you put a metal or steel tank in the ground, after a while, what's going to happen to that metal? It's going to start to rust. It's going to start to erode. And before you know it, that tank's going to start leaking fuel oil. Now you got fuel oil leaking into the ground, contaminating groundwater, and obviously that is an issue. So once we figured out what was going on there, we decided that's a no-no. You're no longer allowed to have these underground storage tanks. Now they have to be put back above ground. But when they changed that law, making you put it above ground, you really had a couple of options here. One, you could just dig the tank that was in the ground. You could dig that back up and put it above ground. And I'm going to tell you, if you thought it was not very pleasing to look at before you put it in the ground, it's not going to look good at all after being in the ground for many, many years. And so anyway, so most people, if not pretty much all of them, just decided to leave the tank that's in the ground. They decided to leave it in the ground. They're just not using it anymore. And put a new tank above ground, because you cannot have it below ground anymore. So the reason this is an issue, again, with a lot of older homes, there's still a lot of these underground storage tanks sitting in the yard. And if there is an underground storage tank on that property, that has to be disclosed. How do you know it's there? Because it's buried. If you're a real estate agent, how will you know? Well, you may not. But one way, hopefully, you would know is, obviously, even though they buried the tank, they still had to have a way to put the fuel oil into the tank. So what you would have is, you'd have like a pipe sticking up out of the ground, maybe a foot up out of the ground, and that's how they filled it up. Put fuel oil through that pipe, went into the tank. If you're walking around, especially on the side of the house or in the back of the house, and it would be usually pretty close to the house, I'd say within 10 or 15 feet anyway. If you're just walking around and you just see an old pipe sticking up out of the ground, guess what that is? That's an underground storage tank. But where the real problem comes in here, what a lot of people have done, they actually have just kind of dug out around where the pipe's coming out of the ground and then cut the pipe off. They just cut it off and then covered it back up. That's illegal, number one. So that's a no-no. But if the homeowner has done that, then you may not have any idea there's an underground storage tank. Now look, you're not supposed to know things. There's no way to know. You do have an obligation, to ask questions. If you have a feeling, there might have been an underground storage tank, you might want to ask the seller, do you know if there's an underground storage tank? And then you kind of got to go with what they say. But if you see a pipe sticking up out the ground and nobody knows what it's there for, or what, I see it all the time, especially when I'm appraising. I always ask them, I said, do you know what this pipe is for? And typically they'll say, I have no idea, Mr. Griffin. That pipe's been there as long as I've owned this house. It was there when we bought it. I have no idea what that's for. Excuse me, what that's for. And then I'll tell them, well, it's an underground storage tank. That's what it is. But anyway, I know if I'm representing a buyer for a property and there is an underground storage tank, and look, first of all you're required to do is disclose it to the buyer if there's one there. and then the buyer can make whatever decision they want to make from there. Y'all, they may decide not to buy it. They may decide, I don't care. It's up to the buyer. But what I always recommend is that, we will ask the seller to do one of two things. Either dig that tank up and get rid of it, and then obviously fill it back in with topsoil, or I want professionals, not just the homeowner. I want, a professional to come in and make sure there's no fuel oil still left in that tank. Because I'm telling you, a lot of them, there's still some fuel oil in the tank if it hasn't already leaked out. So I'll tell them if there's any in there, I want that to be taken out, suck it out. And then once they get all the fuel oil out, then I want you to backfill that tank with sand. Fill the tank up with sand. Because y'all, sooner or later, this is gonna happen. Y'all, that tank every day is gonna rust and corrode a little bit more. It will get weaker and weaker. Y'all, it would be terrible if somebody, especially if they didn't know the tank was even there, and they drive a car or a tractor or something over the top of it and that thing collapses, y'all, that could be a problem. That would not be good at all, okay? So be careful with that. Radon is an environmental issue we need to be careful with. I will tell you, this is a much bigger problem for some than it is for others. But y'all, it says radon is a colorless, odorless, and tasteless radioactive gas that comes out of the ground. Y'all, over time, as the uranium within the ground starts to deteriorate and kind of breaks down, y'all, that's what releases the gas. And I will tell you, that's a question a lot of times they like to ask again on the exam. What is the cause of radon? Uranium. As it breaks down, it releases the gas. It just seeps up through the ground and into the air. But as it says here, it's colorless, odorless, and tasteless. You can't see it, you can't smell it, and you can't taste it. The only way you'll ever know if you have radon is to test for it. And I will tell you, they're very inexpensive. You can go to any, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever. You can buy a radon detector that you can put in your house, and they're not expensive at all. But anyway, obviously this gas can cause some major health problems if you breathe it in very much, okay? And the problem is, in fact, you see here, it talks about new homes versus older homes. Does radon affect older homes any more or less than a newer home? They like to ask you about that. In fact, they'll ask you, if you got a brand new home, is that any safer from radon than an older home? Y'all talking about because of the way it's built and so forth. The answer is no, absolutely not. The problem is, when the house is built, one, you don't know if radon will be coming out the ground here, and you certainly don't know where it's going to come out of the ground. Now, once we identify there is radon, then they can pinpoint exactly where it's coming out of the ground, and you can have it vented away from the house. But here's where we run into problems. If you have a house that's built on crawl space, you can crawl underneath the house. Assuming the crawl space is vented, you're probably going to be okay when it comes to radon. Okay, depending on how much radon might be in that particular area. But I'm trying to figure out how I want to explain this, but anyway, as radon, when radon comes out of the ground and hits the air, assuming there's nothing on top of it, whatever, what's it going to do? It'll just dissipate. and then there's no problems, no issues. Where you run into problems, and this is what you want to pay attention to, if there's not any, again, if it goes into crawl space and it's vented, good chance it's just going to dissipate. But if you have a house that has any living area below the surface of the ground, that's the type home you better be careful with it. Because y'all say, for example, say there's a basement. When that gas comes out of the ground and it's right underneath that basement, there's nowhere else for it to go. It can't dissipate. Now, first of all, can that radon gas go through a concrete floor, or can it go through concrete, period? Absolutely it can. Won't even slow it down too much. Water can penetrate concrete. A gas will have no problem going through concrete. It's just a very coarse material. So, because there's really nowhere else for it to go, you could, if you got a basement, you may very well have radon there. Or maybe if your house is built on a slab, potentially you could get radon that way. But anyway, so they might ask you the question, which of the following homes would be the most susceptible to radon, or maybe the least susceptible? What you're looking for, if they're saying the most susceptible, then I would be looking for which one of these homes would have either living area that is actually below the surface of the ground, or is the closest to the ground. Because the further you get off the ground, the likelihood of radon kind of goes away. But anyway, that's what radon does. Hopefully that won't be too big a deal. EIFS, or what we refer to as artificial stucco. Again, I assume you probably know what stucco is. But artificial stucco is not the same necessarily as stucco. It looks like stucco, but it's more of a synthetic material. Stucco typically just concrete that they spread all over the exterior of the house. This EIFS is more of a synthetic material. We've been having a lot of problems in many states, not every state, but a lot of states are having issues with this type of material, because if it's not installed properly, you could have some major damage to the property. If moisture, humidity, water is able to get up between that siding and your house, you got a problem. Because and by the way, by the time you realize you got a problem, it will be too late. Your house has just about rotted down. That's how you know we got a problem, because I'm starting to see some rotten areas around the house now. Just creates a lot of issues if it's not installed properly. Some states have more problems with it than others. So that's something you would want to disclose for sure. Okie dokie.